Baltimore, Maryland, April 1861. The United States is on the edge of civil war. Across the country, states are choosing sides, north or south. But Baltimore sits in the middle of that divide, a busy port city, a place where northern industry and southern sympathies collide. Ships fill the harbor, railroads connect the city to Washington and the northern states. Soldiers pass through the streets almost every day, but something dangerous is happening beneath the surface. Neighbors argue, crowds gather in the streets, rumors spread through taverns and newspapers. Because in Baltimore, people are not only worried about the war, they are worried about each other, and very soon, the first blood of the Civil War will be spilled on these streets. Baltimore in 1861 is one of the largest cities in the United States, a powerful port on the Chesapeake Bay. Merchants ship tobacco, grain, and manufactured goods across the Atlantic. Railroads bring cargo and passengers from the northern states. At the same time, the city has deep cultural ties to the South. Many residents sympathize with the Confederacy. Others support the Union, which means Baltimore becomes a border city inside a border state. Maryland officially remains in the Union, but public opinion is deeply divided, and every day that division becomes more visible. At first glance, Baltimore appears normal. Markets open each morning. Dock workers unload ships along the harbor. Street vendors shout from busy corners. Carriages roll along the cobblestone streets. But beneath that normal routine, tension simmers. Political debates erupt in taverns. Newspapers print fiery editorials. Crowds gather around bulletin boards, reading the latest war news. Families argue about loyalty. Friends stop speaking to each other because the question dividing the nation now divides Baltimore as well. Should the city support the Union or the Confederacy? And no one seems able to agree. Baltimore's importance is not only political, it is also strategic. The city sits on the most important rail route connecting the northern states to Washington, D.C., which means Union troops traveling to defend the capital must pass directly through Baltimore. For the federal government, keeping that route open is essential. If hostile crowds block the railroads, Washington could become isolated. And if the capital becomes vulnerable, the entire Union government could be threatened. So when the first regiments of Union soldiers begin traveling south in April 1861, they are ordered to pass through Baltimore quickly. But the city is already boiling with anger. On the morning of April 19, 1861, Baltimore wakes up to unusual news. Union soldiers are arriving by train. These troops are part of the Massachusetts militia, rushing south to defend Washington after the outbreak of war. Their orders are simple: move quickly through Baltimore and continue toward the capital. But the journey through the city is complicated. At the time, Baltimore's railroad system is divided between different stations. Trains arriving from the north cannot continue directly to the southern lines. Instead, rail cars must be pulled through the city streets by horses to reach the next station. That means the soldiers cannot simply pass unnoticed. They must move slowly through the heart of Baltimore. As the first rail cars roll into the station, curious residents gather nearby. Word spreads quickly through the city that Northern troops are passing through Baltimore. Crowds begin forming along the streets. Some people come only to watch. Others arrive already angry. Shouts begin to echo through the crowd. Insults are thrown toward the soldiers. Many residents in Baltimore sympathize with the southern states, and the sight of Union troops moving through their city feels like a provocation. At first, the soldiers remain inside the rail cars trying to ignore the growing hostility outside. But the crowds continue to grow. Dozens become hundreds. The streets tighten with people pressing closer to the tracks. Some begin waving Confederate flags. Others shout that the soldiers should turn back. Stones begin landing near the train cars. Windows rattle. Tension spreads through the soldiers as they realize the situation is becoming dangerous. Officers attempt to maintain order and push the convoy forward, but the pace is slow. Horse teams struggle to pull the heavy rail cars through the packed streets. And with every block, the anger in the crowd grows stronger. What began as a tense escort through the city is quickly turning into something far more volatile. Within minutes, Baltimore will move from shouting and insults to violence. At first, the tension builds slowly as the rail cars carrying Union soldiers move through the streets of Baltimore. The crowds along the route continue to grow. Men gather near intersections. Dock workers leave the harbor to watch. Shopkeepers step outside their doors. Windows above the streets begin filling with people looking down at the strange procession. Many in the crowd are angry. They see the soldiers as invaders marching through a city where sympathy for the South runs deep. Shouts begin echoing through the streets. Insults are thrown at the soldiers. Some people wave Confederate flags. Others yell for the troops to turn back. At first, the soldiers try to ignore the crowd. They remain inside the rail cars as horses slowly pull them along the tracks. But the anger around them keeps building. Soon, the shouting turns into something more dangerous. A stone crashes against one of the rail cars, then another. Bricks and pieces of broken pavement begin flying through the air. Glass shatters. Passengers inside the cars duck as debris slams against the wooden sides. The rail line ahead suddenly becomes blocked. Crowds pull loose rails from the street. Others drag carts and debris onto the tracks. The train cannot move forward. Now the soldiers have no choice. They must leave the rail cars and continue on foot. As they step into the streets, the crowd surges closer. The noise becomes overwhelming. Hundreds of voices shouting at once. More stones fly. Some men in the crowd carry clubs. Others pick up anything they can use as a weapon. The soldiers form a defensive line and begin marching forward toward the next station. But every step becomes more difficult. The crowd presses in. Suddenly, a gunshot cracks through the noise. For a brief moment, everything seems to freeze. Then more shots follow. No one later agrees on exactly who fired first. But within seconds, the streets erupt into chaos. Some soldiers fire their rifles. Others try to push through the crowd with bayonets. People run in every direction. Smoke fills the narrow streets. More gunshots echo between the buildings. Men fall to the ground, some wounded, some dead. What began as shouting in the streets has turned into open violence. Baltimore, a city already divided by politics and fear, has now become one of the first places where the Civil War turns deadly. And the shock of what has just happened will spread far beyond the city's streets. The violence on the streets of Baltimore escalates quickly. What began as angry shouting and thrown stones suddenly turns into something far more dangerous. As the Union soldiers try to push their way through the crowd, the mob grows larger and more aggressive. Bricks crash against train cars. Glass shatters. People surge forward from side streets and alleyways. The soldiers are trapped between hostile crowds and narrow streets with little room to escape. Then a gunshot echoes through the chaos. For a brief second, everything seems to freeze. No one is completely certain who fired first, a soldier or someone in the crowd. But that single shot changes everything. More shots follow. Smoke fills the air. Union soldiers begin firing into the crowd as they try to break through the mob and continue toward their train cars. Panic spreads instantly. People run in every direction. Some civilians fall wounded on the streets. Several soldiers are struck by rocks, bricks, and gunfire. Within minutes, the confrontation becomes deadly. By the time the fighting stops, multiple soldiers lie dead. Several Baltimore civilians have also been killed. Dozens more are injured. The streets that only hours earlier were crowded with curious onlookers are now marked by blood and shattered debris. News of the clash spreads rapidly across the country. Many historians would later describe the Baltimore riot as the first bloodshed of the American Civil War, a grim sign that the conflict dividing the nation would soon become far more violent than many had imagined. In the hours after the violence, Baltimore falls into an uneasy silence. Smoke still lingers above parts of the city where crowds had gathered. Broken windows and scattered debris remain along the streets where the confrontation took place. People move cautiously through the neighborhoods, speaking in hushed voices, trying to understand how quickly the situation had spiraled out of control. The Union soldiers who managed to pass through the city continue their journey toward Washington. But the message sent by the riot is unmistakable. Baltimore is unstable. And for the federal government, that instability is dangerous. If the rail routes through the city are blocked, Washington could become isolated from the northern states. Reinforcements, supplies, and communication could all be cut off. For a capital already nervous about the outbreak of war, this possibility is alarming. President Abraham Lincoln quickly recognizes the threat. Within days, the federal government begins taking stronger measures to secure the region. Additional Union troops are moved closer to Maryland. Rail lines are protected. Key bridges are guarded. Some local leaders suspected of supporting rebellion are arrested in order to prevent further uprisings. The city that had briefly erupted into violence is now placed under tighter federal control. For many residents of Baltimore, the atmosphere becomes tense and uncertain. Soldiers patrol areas that only days earlier had been filled with angry crowds. Newspapers debate what the riot means for the future of Maryland. But one thing is clear. The events in Baltimore have revealed how fragile the situation truly is. The war has only just begun, and already American cities are feeling its impact. What happened on the streets of Baltimore was more than a riot. It was a warning, a glimpse of how deeply the nation had already begun to divide. Looking back at Baltimore in 1861 reveals something deeper than a single riot or a single day of violence. The city itself stood directly between two different Americas. To the north were the industrial states, cities growing rapidly with factories, railroads, and strong support for the Union. To the south were the plantation states, where many people believed their future depended on separating from the United States. Baltimore existed right on that line. Economically, the city traded with both regions. Ships in the harbor carried goods north and south. Railroads connected Baltimore to Washington, Philadelphia, and the deeper South. But the division was not only economic, it was personal. Inside Baltimore, neighbors held completely different loyalties. Some residents waved Union flags, others quietly supported the Confederacy. Families argued at dinner tables. Political debates filled taverns and street corners. Every new headline about the war made the tension worse. And because Baltimore was so close to the national capital, the stakes were even higher. If the city fully turned against the Union, Washington itself could become isolated and vulnerable. This made Baltimore one of the most dangerous places in America during the first months of the Civil War, a city where one street might support the Union, while the next might cheer for the Confederacy. A place where soldiers marching through the city were not simply passing through, they were walking directly through a population divided by fear, anger, and uncertainty about the future. And for a brief but violent moment in April 1861, that fragile balance collapsed, revealing just how quickly a divided city could erupt into conflict. What you've just seen is a reconstruction of Baltimore in 1861, during the tense days when the first violent clashes of the American Civil War erupted in the city. The streets, harbor, rail stations, and crowds shown in this video were recreated using AI reconstruction technology to visualize the atmosphere of Baltimore during this dramatic moment in history. If you want to experience more forgotten moments of history brought to life through AI reconstruction, subscribe for the next journey into the past.